Fear has long been one of the most effective tools in political leadership, not because it creates solutions, but because it creates obedience. When leaders emphasize external enemies, looming threats, or the possibility of war, they are not simply informing the public, they are shaping emotions and behavior. Fear narrows the public's focus, discourages critical thinking, and pushes people toward accepting drastic measures that would otherwise face strong resistance. In moments of heightened anxiety, citizens are more likely to tolerate reduced civil liberties, expanded military budgets, and aggressive foreign policies, all under the promise of protection and national security. This strategy becomes especially useful during times of domestic instability. When economies struggle, inflation rises, wages stagnate, or political divisions deepen, leaders often redirect public attention outward. By highlighting foreign adversaries, governments create a narrative in which national problems are caused not by internal policy failures, corporate influence, or structural inequality, but by external forces threatening the nation's survival. This redirection allows political elites to avoid accountability while presenting themselves as strong defenders of the public interest. Fear becomes a convenient distraction, shifting anger away from economic injustice and toward distant enemies. Media amplification plays a critical role in this process. Dramatic headlines, urgent broadcasts, and emotionally charged language reinforce the sense of crisis. Complex geopolitical issues are reduced to simplified good versus evil narratives that leave little room for nuance or debate. As a result, the public consumes politics as spectacle rather than substance. This environment rewards leaders who speak in absolutes and punish those who advocate patience, diplomacy, or compromise. The louder and more alarming the message, the more attention it receives, creating a cycle in which fear driven rhetoric becomes politically profitable. Fear also reshapes national identity. When a population is constantly reminded of external threats, unity is built not around shared values or social progress, but around opposition to an imagined enemy. This creates an us versus them mentality that can justify discrimination, surveillance, and the erosion of democratic norms. Over time, societies begin to equate strength with aggression and loyalty with unquestioning support of authority. In such climates, dissent is easily labeled as weakness or betrayal, further silencing critical voices. Perhaps most dangerously, fear normalizes permanent crisis. When citizens are conditioned to believe that danger is constant and unavoidable, extraordinary measures become ordinary. Emergency powers, expanded military presence, and massive defense spending are no longer seen as temporary responses, but as permanent features of governance. This shift benefits powerful institutions and industries that thrive on conflict and instability, while ordinary people are left with fewer protections, fewer resources, and fewer opportunities for social investment. In this way, fear is not just a reaction to global events, it is actively produced and managed. It becomes a political resource, carefully deployed to maintain control, consolidate power, and shape public opinion. Instead of encouraging informed participation and democratic debate, fear based politics turns citizens into passive spectators, conditioned to react emotionally rather than think critically. The economic costs of militarization are often hidden behind patriotic language and national security justifications, but their impact reaches deeply into everyday life. When governments increase military spending, They are not creating wealth out of thin air. They are redirecting public resources away from essential social needs. Every additional dollar allocated to weapon systems, foreign interventions, or expanded defense infrastructure is a dollar not invested in schools, hospitals, housing, or public transportation. This trade off is rarely presented honestly to the public, yet it shapes the quality of life for millions of people. For ordinary taxpayers, militarization translates into heavier financial burdens. Defense budgets are funded through taxes and government borrowing, which often leads to higher public debt and long term financial obligations. As governments prioritize military expenditures, they frequently justify cuts to social programs by claiming there is not enough money. This creates a paradox in which massive sums are readily available for war preparation, while basic services struggle to remain funded. The result is a society where public welfare is weakened while military institutions continue to expand. The global economy also feels the ripple effects of military escalation. Rising geopolitical tensions disrupt trade routes, destabilize energy markets, and create uncertainty for investors. When oil and gas supplies are threatened or sanctions are imposed, prices rise quickly, affecting transportation costs, food production, and household utility bills. Inflation driven by conflict related instability hits low and middle income families the hardest, as a larger share of their income is spent on essential goods. What begins as a foreign policy decision quickly becomes a personal financial strain for people far removed from the battlefield. Militarization also strengthens powerful corporate interests. Defense contractors and arms manufacturers benefit enormously from increased military spending, often securing long term government contracts worth billions. These corporations gain political influence through lobbying and campaign contributions, shaping policy decisions in ways that prioritize profit over public well being. This creates a cycle in which economic incentives favor continued tension and conflict because peace does not generate the same level of financial return. As a result, economic priorities become increasingly aligned with warfare rather than social development. Beyond immediate costs, there are long term economic consequences that persist long after conflicts end. War damages infrastructure, displaces populations, and destabilizes entire regions, requiring massive reconstruction efforts that often fall on taxpayers. Veterans returning from conflict zones may require extensive health care and social support, adding further strain to public systems that are already underfunded. Meanwhile, the opportunity cost of militarization continues to grow as generations miss out on investments in education, innovation, and sustainable development that could have strengthened economic resilience and social stability. The projection of power has become a central feature of modern foreign policy, often presented as a necessary demonstration of strength and leadership. Governments use military parades, public threats, and strategic deployments to signal dominance on the global stage, reinforcing the image of authority both at home and abroad. Yet this performance of strength frequently has little to do with creating genuine security. Instead, it serves symbolic and political purposes aimed at maintaining influence, deterring rivals through intimidation, and preserving status within international power hierarchies. True security is built on stability, cooperation, and trust, but power projection relies on confrontation and fear. When leaders emphasize dominance, they frame global relations as a competition where one nation's gain must come at another's loss. This mindset encourages escalation rather than compromise, making conflicts more likely and peace more difficult to sustain. Military posturing can provoke rival states to respond in kind, triggering arms races that consume vast resources without addressing the underlying causes of tension, such as economic inequality, territorial disputes, or political exclusion. At the domestic level, power projection also plays an important psychological role. It allows leaders to appear decisive and strong, appealing to voters who associate assertiveness with effective leadership. Public displays of military capability create a sense of national pride and unity, even when social conditions are deteriorating. In this way, symbolic acts of strength become substitutes for meaningful progress on healthcare, education, employment, and infrastructure. Political energy is redirected toward external dominance rather than internal development. The illusion of security created by power projection can be dangerously misleading. Advanced weapons systems and military alliances may offer short term deterrence, but they do not eliminate the risks of miscalculation, accidental escalation, or unintended consequences. History is filled with examples where aggressive posturing led to conflicts that neither side originally intended. When diplomacy is sidelined in favor of intimidation, communication channels weaken, misunderstandings grow, and small incidents can spiral into major confrontations. Moreover, the emphasis on dominance often undermines international cooperation on shared global challenges. Issues such as climate change, pandemics, migration, and economic instability require collective action across borders. When nations prioritize military competition over collaboration, trust erodes and multilateral institutions lose effectiveness. Resources that could be invested in scientific research, humanitarian aid, and global development are instead absorbed by defense spending and strategic rivalries. Power projection also reinforces unequal global structures. Stronger nations use their military and economic influence to shape international rules in their favor, often at the expense of weaker states. This creates resentment, resistance, and instability, which in turn are used to justify further displays of force. The cycle perpetuates itself, with dominance presented as security and security used as justification for dominance, while the deeper structural problems remain unresolved. Diplomacy is often portrayed as slow, weak, or ineffective when compared to the dramatic appeal of military action, yet history repeatedly shows that lasting peace is built through dialogue rather than force. While weapons can impose temporary control over territory or populations, they cannot resolve political grievances, economic inequality, or cultural divisions. Negotiation, cooperation, and mutual recognition address the deeper roots of conflict, creating pathways toward stability that military interventions consistently fail to achieve. When diplomacy is prioritized, it opens channels of communication that reduce misunderstandings and prevent escalation. Regular dialogue between nations allows leaders to clarify intentions, manage disputes, and find common ground even in moments of tension. These conversations may not always produce immediate results, but they create frameworks for trust and predictability. In contrast, the absence of diplomatic engagement increases uncertainty and suspicion, making states more likely to assume hostile intentions and respond with aggression. Force first strategies also tend to produce unintended consequences. Military interventions often destabilize regions, displace civilian populations, and create power vacuums that extremist groups can exploit. Rather than eliminating threats, these actions frequently generate new ones, prolonging cycles of violence. Diplomacy, on the other hand, focuses on conflict prevention by addressing underlying political and economic conditions, by supporting inclusive governance, fair resource distribution, and regional cooperation. Diplomatic efforts reduce the incentives for violence and rebellion. Another important dimension of diplomacy is its economic impact. Peaceful relations encourage trade, investment, and cross border collaboration, strengthening economies on all sides. When nations cooperate rather than confront, they can share technology, expand markets, and improve living standards for their populations. Military conflict disrupts supply chains, discourages investment, and drains public resources. Choosing diplomacy is not only a moral decision, but also an economic strategy that promotes long term prosperity and resilience. Diplomacy also reinforces international norms and institutions that promote collective security. Organizations and treaties provide platforms for resolving disputes without resorting to violence, setting standards for human rights, arms control, and environmental protection. While these institutions are imperfect, they represent attempts to replace chaos with cooperation. When powerful nations bypass diplomatic mechanisms in favor of unilateral action, they weaken the global rules based system and encourage others to do the same. Perhaps most importantly, diplomacy recognizes the shared humanity of those on all sides of conflict. It treats opponents not as permanent enemies, but as political actors with interests, fears, and motivations that can be understood and addressed. This perspective does not excuse wrongdoing, but it creates space for compromise and reconciliation. By prioritizing dialogue over domination, diplomacy affirms that security is not achieved through fear, but through mutual respect, cooperation, and the difficult work of building trust across deep divides. Public responsibility and global awareness are essential foundations for challenging fear based politics and demanding a more just international order. In democratic societies, political power ultimately rests with the people, yet this power is often weakened by apathy, misinformation, and emotional manipulation. When citizens accept official narratives without question, they allow leaders to operate with limited accountability. Active engagement, critical thinking, and informed participation are necessary to prevent the concentration of power and the normalization of aggressive policies that harm both domestic and international communities. One of the most important aspects of public responsibility is media literacy. In an age of rapid information sharing, people are constantly exposed to headlines, social media posts, and televised commentary designed to provoke emotional reactions. Fear based messaging spreads quickly because it captures attention and reinforces existing biases. By learning to evaluate sources, question framing, and seek diverse perspectives, citizens can resist manipulation and develop a more balanced understanding of global events. This awareness reduces the effectiveness of propaganda and creates space for more thoughtful public debate. Global awareness also expands the moral horizon of political decision making. When people view conflicts only through the lens of national interest, it becomes easier to ignore the suffering of others. Understanding the human consequences of war, sanctions, and political instability encourages empathy and solidarity across borders. This perspective challenges the idea that security for one nation must come at the expense of another. Instead, it promotes the concept of shared security, where stability is built through cooperation and mutual benefit. Civic participation plays a critical role in transforming awareness into action. Voting, peaceful protest, community organizing, and public dialogue allow citizens to influence policy and hold leaders accountable. These forms of engagement signal that the public expects transparency, ethical leadership, and peaceful solutions to international disputes. When people remain silent, decision makers face little pressure to change course. Collective action, even when gradual, has historically driven major social and political reforms. Education is another powerful tool for building long term public responsibility. Schools and universities that emphasize critical thinking, global history, and civic engagement help prepare future generations to navigate complex political realities. By understanding past conflicts and their consequences, young people are better equipped to recognize repeating patterns and challenge harmful strategies. Education fosters the ability to question authority respectfully while demanding evidence based and humane policies. Ultimately, public responsibility and global awareness shift the focus of politics from power and dominance to human well being. They encourage societies to measure success not by military strength or territorial influence, but by the quality of life, social stability, and international cooperation they achieve. When citizens actively engage with global issues and demand ethical leadership, they create pressure for policies that prioritize peace, justice, and sustainability over fear and confrontation.